You know, the only reason I had come to Munich was not really to work as a journalist. It was to figure out how to get the women's marathon in the Olympic Games. Because I realized that after I ran my 251, that if there was talent out there, these women needed an opportunity because they wouldn't believe they had it unless it was in the Olympic Games. So that became my focus, is to get the event in the Olympic Games. And I thought in '72 I could somehow meet the right people who could steer me in the right direction for making it happen in the International Olympic Committee. And I was walking along, having gotten nowhere with any of this, nowhere. Looked up at the skyline, and I suddenly realized it was Deutsche Bank, BMW, Coca-Cola, Kodak Film. I said, these are the drivers. These are the drivers, it's major sponsorship. If I go back home and write a proposal to a major sponsor, I can underwrite a program for women and create the events that they need and show that to the International Olympic Committee, and we're going to get the women's marathon in the Olympic Games. And by golly, I did, and I did. It was just amazing. I wrote this proposal, and I took it to Avon Cosmetics, the world's largest cosmetics company at the time, as really just sort of a dream proposal, as sort of a flyer. And I took it into them. They said, my God, this is wonderful. And they hired me. And it was like that movie in The Candidate. I know you guys are probably too young to remember that. And I sort of went home and I said, what do I do now? You know. Anyway, I created this program. Eventually, we had 400 races in 27 countries for 1 million women. And I got to tell you how we change women's lives. And I told you this, in a way, it's not about running, it's about empowerment, men or women. It's about changing our lives. And the simple act of running can change our lives so profoundly, not just because of that victory under the belt, but try this. In Japan, does anybody here know of a Japanese heroine? In 3,000 years, there hadn't been one until we did our running program in Japan, and the women there began to run, and suddenly, winning in the Olympics, they became rock stars. Unbelievable. And this is a very industrialized country, very rich country, where the women are still very much second-class citizens. So now let's go to a second-class country where women are really second-class citizens. Let's go to Kenya, where the women there, oh my God, has anybody been to Kenya? I mean, they spend the day carrying water on their head, and their little children walk around carrying water on their head, and they really have nothing. You know, they're so, so poor. And when they began running, and we realized the talent they had, and some of these women left Kenya, and now they're, of course, dominating the running scene, winning prize money. They're not staying in the United States and driving a Mercedes. They go back to their village, and they're sanitizing water. They're inoculating the kids. They're building schools. They're changing the social fabric. It's unbelievable what they're doing. And this is a simple act of putting one foot in front of the other. No shoes, no money. That's how it's happening. Last one, a funny one. Everybody's going to laugh, especially the guys. And this is when I went to Brazil to organize the women's road race there. And the head of the Brazil Athletic Federation said, the women in this country will never run. And I said, why? And he said, because the women here are feminine. And I said, well, what's unfeminine about running? And he said, no, they won't run. Your race will not be successful. And I felt kind of bad for a while. I went down on Ipanema Beach. Been to Brazil. These women are playing beach volleyball, and they're like wearing a postage stamp. And I said, these women are going to love running. So we publicized it to make it fun and festive. And he said, well, the head of the federation said, well, I'll come. I said, you've got to come start the race for us. He said, all right. But he said, I will not bring my wife with me. I said, okay. And he said, and I will not permit my daughter to come. Permit my daughter to come. I said, okay, sir, senor, suit yourself. We'd really like you there. So he showed up saying, you're only going to have about 100 women who are going to come to this thing. 10,000 women showed up. 10,000 women. My husband said, you can't ignore 10,000 women in shorts running through the streets of Rio de Janeiro. Well, I'm not a stupid person, and neither is the head of the Athletic Federation, because he was on TV every night firing the starting gun and looked like he had invented it. Okay? And I said, oh, senor, we just couldn't have done this without you. Thank you so much, you know. Because he had a multi-thousand-dollar program that made him look good, that was on television every night. And I had a vote with the International Olympic Committee from a non-traditional country, okay? So we gathered votes as we went around, and in one final marathon race in London in 1980, we closed downtown London streets for the first time in history for a sports event. This marathon became what is now the London Marathon. This was the prototype for it in 1980. The streets had only been closed for the Queen's processions before. And now we closed it for a women's marathon. And in that marathon, we had 27 countries and 5 continents represented, and the International Olympic Committee had told us that we needed 23 and 3 continents. So we so far exceeded their requirement that the International Olympic Committee voted in the women's marathon into the Olympic Games. And that was voted in 1984, which I got to tell you is a glacial warp speed, okay? The IOC moves at a glacial pace, and so this was warp speed for getting the marathon event into the Olympic Games. And it was voted in, as I say, for 1984. And I don't know if you've had Joan Benoit Samuelson here as a speaker from Maine, who, of course, won that first women's marathon. But as she came into the Olympic state, in fact, I'm going to read this from my book, okay? Because this is the final paragraph of my book. And it was so astonishing to see her come into that stadium and win that Olympic gold medal. I'm just going to read this here. Here's another thing. By 1984, I was not only doing this global program for Avon, but I was working for ABC Sports because, and this is another resilient story, you know, suddenly television realized for the Olympic Games there was a women's marathon. And they said, we don't have anybody who knows anything about the women's marathon. Put it in my hand, I said, I know a lot about it. And they said, you do? And I said, I know an awful lot about it. And they said, okay, well, you got the job. So now I'm sitting with Al Michaels in my blazer and my tie, and I'm doing the broadcast of the Olympic Games. So another thing I just want to tell you is Woody Allen, I know he's a disturbed guy, but he's a talented guy, but he's a little disturbed. He had the most wonderful expression, the secret of my success is that I showed up, okay? I raised my hand, I got the job, I'm now broadcasting the Olympic Games, okay? And now Joan Benoit has run the race, and she's come into the stadium, and then Greta Weitz was second, Rosa Mota from Portugal was third, and this is how I repeat it and remember it. In my earpiece, I remember the producer saying to me, up the music and roll the credits, the race is over, now we're going to roll the credits, we roll part of the race, and the music playing, boom, 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 Rocky music. And I'm now watching this kind of replay thing, and I'm thinking, I always knew that nobody would understand how important this is until the first woman comes through the tunnel and into the Olympic Stadium. That's when 90,000 people will get it. But it's more. It's when 2.2 billion people watching television will get it. And tradition-bound households from America to Afghanistan, where women have faces covered and are not allowed in education, every culture knows that 26.2 miles or 42.2 kilometers is a long race. Both men and women have walked or bicycled or even ridden a donkey over the distance, and you know it's far. And here are women running it with strength, courage, speed, and grace. In one dramatic race, they showed the world the limitlessness of women's heroic capability. And then in my earpiece, I hear the producer again say, okay, re-roll the Benoit finish. Here she is again, wrap it. And she's entering the tunnel. And we see Joan pitter-pattering through those streets of Los Angeles, and suddenly she goes into the dark tunnel. And I say, she's a perfect symbol now for much of women's history. As once more we see her enter the darkness, obscured for a few seconds, and then stride out of the darkness to run powerfully and beautifully into a shimmering stadium, to a welcome that reverberates to the ocean. And what that, of course, means is that around the world, everybody understood now that women could do the longest event in the highest echelon of sport, which was the marathon. And that if they could do that, wow, they could do anything. And if you run a marathon yourself, you know if you run a marathon, you can do anything. But I think really, to me, that moment, and this is going to shock you, That moment to me was as important as women getting the right to vote in 1923, which was the social and intellectual acceptance of women. This was the physical acceptance of women. It opens the door for everything else in the future. There should be absolutely no limitation. Having said that, there are incredible limitations. You know, I'm 66, and I always think the revolution is over, and it is so far from over, it's unbelievable. So men and women together, I mean, this is not a girly story. I hope you guys realize this, okay? This is a men and women together story. It's about a human accomplishment. It's about equality. It's about us doing things together. But, you know, there is still so much to do.